hello everyone, and thank you for joining this new, the first event of this new series, where we will look at different regions of the world to analyze a bit how the space sector is developing globally. And today we start with Latin America. I'm based in Mexico, though, so this is obviously particularly important to me and also to my guests who are also based in Latin America. And we have great speakers today. We have Clara Alvarez, Ian Grosner, and Luciano Giesso. And I will introduce each of them quickly, and then we will turn to the debate today. So Clara Luz is an attorney, member of the Mexican National Researcher System, Level 3, and a professor of the University of Panamericana in Mexico. She is the author of 7 books on telecommunications and has been an expert witness in 2 international arbitrations. One of them, Universidad versus Mexico, which I think people who are following space arbitration are aware of. And she is currently finalizing further research on satellites and the law. Ian Grosner is a federal attorney in Brazil, and since 2022, he has been serving as a legal counsel and deputy head of the Legal Services Department at the Brazilian Space Agency. He has a master's degree from the University of Leiden and Air and Space Law. And in March 2023, he was appointed and elected chair of the working group on the definition and delimitation of outer space of the legal subcommittee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Congratulations, Ian, because it's very recent. Luciano Giesso serves as head of sales, global governments at Satellogic. He's a multinational executive with more than 20 years experience in technology and services. He holds an engineer's degree from UCA and an MBA from San Andres University, both in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And he has also completed executive programs in Harvard Business School and MIT Sloan School of Management. And he's not a lawyer, so it will be very interesting to hear his perspective, because I don't want to be just about the law, but we also want to get a sense of how the industry is viewing the developments in Latin America and the potential for future development of the space sector here. So I want to start off the event with a more personal question, and I would like to ask each of our panelists to tell us a little bit more about their work and their involvement with outer space. So maybe we can start with Clara, ladies first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be with you. And let me tell you that one of the issues that I have seen is that space and law is something that is not addressed fully, or there's not a lot of documents in Spanish. So now I'm dedicating a lot of time trying to make available for people who are interested in having that comprehension of the law and the space. Because one of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm sure you will agree with me, is that space is the thing for today and for the future. So we need also attorneys to be involved with this. So now I'm dealing with this. And as Laura was saying, I was also an expert witness in a space arbitration matter. That would be my presentation, Laura.
Thank you. Luciano? You're on mute.
There. Thanks very much, Laura, and Torsten and Elena for having me here today with these prestigious colleagues sharing this panel, even though I am the non-lawyer here, so I'm an engineer. When it comes to what we do at Satellogic and what we think we're contributing, to the Earth with is we are bringing the possibility to make critical information more accessible to people and to entities and to governments all around the world. So Satellogic is an Earth observation company. We build satellites such as the ones that you see here. They're micro satellites about the size of a chair, and we look at the planet with very, very high frequency, with very high resolution Earth observation satellites. What this means is actually that we have today the largest constellation of high resolution satellites orbiting anywhere in the planet. So we are able with these satellites today to obtain 70 centimeter imagery of anywhere in the planet up to 7 times a day, with 34 satellites that we have in orbit right now, actually the last 4 of which that we launched last week. So we have a very frequent production of satellites and a very frequent launch schedule to be able to get what we want to be, what is to be our ultimate milestone, which is looking at the Earth complete one time, entirely one time a day. So that meaning that we will have at some point the ability to observe the whole landmass of the planet daily. And we're in that road, and we're a company that was born in Argentina that is now expanded to be a public one. We trade in NASDAQ, and we have a strong focus, regarding this call in particular, in regions such as Latin America. Of course, because I'm Argentinian, I live in the US, but most of the ones that we work at Satellogic came originally from Latin America. So it is our place, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Maybe just to follow up on that, do you still have offices in Argentina, or do you no
Of course,
longer
yeah.
have some? Yeah.
So we today we're about 350 plus employees all around the world, 150 of which are in Argentina. Just to give you a rough description of what we do in every region. Argentina concentrates the core of what the teams of engineering and mission operations. So every design of the satellite comes from people working mostly in Argentina. Then we have our manufacturing facilities in Uruguay and an upcoming one in the Netherlands. Then we have our product team and our C-suite, and today in Spain, in Barcelona. Most of the sales and finance team are spread out in places in the US, like I am, and then we have people scattered all around the world. We have many other locations and countries where people work remotely, where we don't necessarily have an office. But yeah, our presence in Argentina, to answer your original question, is very, very big.
Thank you. That's great. So now, Ian, thank you.
Hi, I would like to thank Laura, Elena, and Thorsten for inviting me to this event. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with Clara and Luciano to talk about space arbitration in Latin America. I have over 20 years of work experience as a legal expert at Advocacia Geral da União, that's Brazilian Attorney General Office. Since last year, I have been working as legal counsel and deputy head of the legal service department at the Brazilian Space Agency, AAB. In this position, I provide a full spectrum of legal advice and guidance on the legal and programmatic aspects of AAB's programs and policies. I have a master's degree from the Universidad of Leiden in the Netherlands in aerospace law. And since then, I have been dedicating my professional life to space law and policy. For now, that's it.
Thank you. So maybe now we can start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about how you see the space industry developing in Brazil and maybe in Latin America more generally? How have you, what have you observed over the last years, and how do you think it will develop in the coming years?
So thank you. Yes, in Brazil since 60s, right? Aligned with the beginning of the discussions over space exploration, Brazil has its own space program. AAB, the Brazilian Space Agency, where I work, takes its missions to task of strengthening the national space sector for society's development, and therefore always seeks to bring innovation as the guiding principle of its actions. We have in Brazil an internal market, physical and immaterial competencies. We have creative people and the will to grow, with real possibilities of inserting ourselves in the global value chains, where in science and technology or in the exploration of the most diverse services. AAB constantly seeks to improve quality and deliver to the community a publication of strategic, commercial, and impact value, all in order to cultivate the good business environments to that generation new opportunities and the new markets to explore. In AAB, we provide one publication and now it's in the third edition. It's the annual mapping of space sector companies conducted by AB. And I can put the link for consultation. It's in Portuguese and English as well. So of course we have a lot to do in Brazil. We have a lot to improve, but I think the AB is trying to make the market for the companies, private companies in Brazil, attractive, not just for Brazilian space companies, but for international space companies as well.
Yeah, no. I've seen that Brazil is becoming more active in its publicizing of opportunities in Brazil, so it's very interesting to observe. Luciano, what is your view about the future of space in Latin America?
So there are a couple of things, you know, from my view that are happening. Yes, as Ian mentioned, you know, the Brazilian Space Agency and the Brazilian space industry have been going on for a long time. Same happened in Argentina and same happened in other countries in Latin America. CONAE, our space agency, was founded with a different name, but only 3 years after NASA. So we have, as Argentinians, we have a bit of a back history in space that goes a way back. I think one thing that is relevant is there's this creation of a Latin America Space Agency going on, to which Mexico and Argentina were, you know, the initial promoters, and there's different countries joining or about to join. It's called ALCE, A-L-C-E, and I think, you know, the intent is to have a model similar to the one of ESA, to the one of the European Space Agency, where there is more communication and more direct ties in between Latin American countries through this space agency, you know, encompassing them all. So other than that, and because, you know, I'm a private company and we work with a different scope than just tied to our country of origin, I think there's a lot of different new players in the space map, and that we see a lot of traction in countries wanting to get into the space race and wanting to use space to their benefit more often and more broadly. And Latin America is one of those, you know, one of those case studies, but it's also happening in places in Asia Pacific. We see a lot of traction upcoming in Africa. And, you know, it is a new paradigm today, and the way the space industry is penetrating different areas and companies such as us that didn't really exist 10 years ago. You know, when we started, there were very few inroads in the space sector with private companies. We see a lot of startups and companies upcoming, and Latin America is a big provider of those startups, where you have, you know, small entrepreneurs building their own space environment and space company, something that didn't happen so much a decade ago even. So there's a lot of things going on, and Latin America is a big example of those initiatives.
Do you have any competitors from Latin America, or are there no other companies you would think could compete at the same level here?
I'd say we collaborate. There's a number of, you know, private sector companies in Brazil that we have had conversations for many years, such as Visiona and others that do things in the space sector, but are not really, you know, at least the ones that I have top of my head right now, and without naming any names, no Earth observation high resolution companies. Yes, there's a very large number of companies entering the rocketing business, for instance, or other types of sensors business or other types of satellites business. So, you know, space is a broad matter, and there's several different sub-industries that you can find. So no, you know, short answer, there is no Earth observation high resolution companies in Latin America other than us, you know, on the private sector. But we see a lot of collaboration opportunities with other companies that complement the things that we do with other technologies.
Thank you. Clara?
Well, let me tell you that Mexico was also one of the beginners in Latin America. In 1962, Mexico started research in space in the National Autonomous University. And we had the National Commission for Outer Space since 1962. However, in 1977, it disappeared. So I think Mexico has a great opportunity to take advantage of current space research. Now we have a space agency since 2010. We have a space agency that's making a lot of work, fostering research, trying to have more industry for space sector, having universities train people for that. But on the other hand, in the difference with Brazil and Argentina, that I see them as they have a long way forward in space activities, I think Mexico, we have to take advantage and take also develop further. I think that also, as now Luciano was telling, when we say space, there are a lot of activities going on. Let me tell you specifically regarding satellite communications. What has happened in Mexico is that despite that there is 100% foreign investment for satellite communications, the Mexican satellites are now only 6 satellites communications from under the Mexican flag. And also, all this century, there has been 6 public bids to have more Mexican satellites on space, and we have only have 1 winning bidder. So what I have seen is that there are a lot of more interest in the private sector to invest in the Brazilian communications sector, for example, rather than Mexico. And we could speak a lot about why if having a satellite on the geostationary orbit could be the same. It doesn't matter the flag, it can have service all over America. Why Mexico is not attractive at all, or apparently it's not attractive at all. But we could discuss further this. On the other hand, we have a constitutional reform that they want, or now it's just recently been approved on the deputy chamber, that space sector should be one priority for Mexico. This reform was approved by all the deputies. There was no vote against. And what this will change the scenery in Mexico would be that perhaps the Mexican Space Agency will have broader powers to foster what could be a good space industry in Mexico. But as an attorney, I have to say that devil is in the details. And once we see a constitutional reform in Mexico, by the way, in Mexico, the constitution is amended every now and then, but just having space activities a priority in the constitution does not necessarily translate in a good law or in effective programs that can foster space activities. So with that, I will leave it, Laura, and we can talk a little bit more further.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually attended a conference in Mexico last week that was organized by Relaca Espacio, and there were a few students who presented projects they have been working on, and they all complained because they were Mexican politicians, and they complained that they need to have more support for the private space industry in Mexico so that there will be more employment opportunities, because I think it's very difficult to work in the space sector in a country where you don't have the nationality because of the restriction of confidential information for military purposes. So they say, like, unless there are more companies in Mexico where they could work, they can just never put to use their knowledge, which is obviously a bit frustrating. But what I also wanted to ask, and one of them has been, or 2 students have presented an idea or a study where they analyzed where in Mexico it would be useful to build a spaceport. And they found a place in Baja California that apparently is perfect. So I wanted to ask what your view is on the need and the development of more spaceports. I know that in Europe, several countries are also thinking about building one. So maybe I think Brazil has one. Maybe for you Ian, to explain a little bit how attractive this is and how well it is working, and also for Luciano to comment on whether if there were more spaceports, you think you would use them, or if you think the needs are covered by the existing ones.
You said about the spaceport, right? Or the question is specific about spaceport.
Sorry, there was noise here. Could you repeat the question, please?
No, yeah, my question is, your question is about the spaceport sector?
Yeah, in Brazil, I think that there is a spaceport, if I'm not mistaken. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about how well it is working. And
sure. Yeah, in Brazil, we have one space port. It's in the north of Brazil, in the state of Maranhão. It's called Alcântara, so Space Center of Alcântara, and it's not new, but it always has used it as a military force here in Brazil, Air Force, right? So, but since 2019, 2018, we tried to develop this program there, to this spaceport there, and that's why we signed with United States agreements to use the spaceport. And last month, we had the first private launch from Alcântara, and it was a South Korean space company. And I think that's the policy right now, and the goal right now, it's to develop this spaceport there. And of course, there's a lot of things to do, especially infrastructure aspects. But of course, I think we have a great potential, especially for Latin American countries. I think it's a good opportunity because it's an excellent spot. It's near the equator. There's excellent possibilities and to launch from there, right? So, and of course, for us, it's great to have our Latin American countries partners using the spaceport. I think it's better. It could be cheaper, and of course, for the logistic reasons, it's opportunity, I think, for everyone. So, but I insist, we have a lot of things to do to improve it, but it's still working right now. And we had this first operation from a South space company last month.
Luciano?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So we, in our business, we make satellites. We launch with different launchers. However, for the past 2 years and for at least the next 50 satellites, we are launching with SpaceX. We signed an agreement in mid or early 2021, and then extended it last year, where we did some joint press announcing that we will launch 68 satellites with them. So we are not so worried about from where they will be launching our satellites, as long as we keep with our quarterly launches. We have launched this year already. We have launched 4 in January and now 4 in April a week ago. And we're launching another 4 with them in June. And as long as they can fit us in any of their launch facilities, we're fine with whatever. So we're not really worrying about spaceport location. We do have, however, conversations with a number of countries where if they have a spaceport facility in their country, and if that were the case with Brazil, we would be very happy to align with the Brazilian Space Agency or whomever would want to use Alcântara as a launch location if we had a project together that demanded that. So, and I mentioned this because our contract with SpaceX is non-exclusive, so we are in fact in conversations with some governments elsewhere that have their own space launching facilities, and that with projects that we are pushing together that involve space systems, in other words, selling satellites to these governments. They want to launch, with the press and the local coverage and so on from their own country. So in those cases, we get involved in choosing a spaceport. Otherwise, it's more of a decision of our launch partner, which is in this case is SpaceX.
But do you think there would be a market for more spaceports? Like, I guess
yeah,
the number of launches
I think so. There is a lack, there is a bit of a bottleneck in launch activities. We have experienced that. We were launching with a European company from French Guiana about 2 years ago. And yes, the pandemic, 3 years ago, the pandemic was there. So that influenced a bit, the delays in the launch. But we had a launch delayed for almost a year, because of different things. As a launch can be delayed because of climate conditions, because of air traffic conditions. There are several different factors that affect the occurrence of a given launch. And it is a bottleneck today. I don't know if it's only about the spaceports, but also about the rockets, and the whole ground segment activity that needs to go on before a launch. Because of our business model and because of the low-cost satellites that we build, we are building satellites very quickly, and that's why we launch, in 3 or 4 or 5 quantities every quarter. We need to have a very frequent launcher, and SpaceX covered that for us. That's why we chose them. But still, there have been delays. The launch that we did in early January this year was supposed to happen 1 month earlier. It's not so big of a delay, and it's understandable, and these things happen. But yes, but maybe if we had more options and there were more spaceports and there were more rockets and the whole launch business was bigger, it would be better, for an increasing satellite manufacturing activity that is happening all around the world.
Yeah, and I think also one of the considerations is that if the moon activities will really take off and we will use space more and more, then if you don't have a spaceport in your country or your region, then probably there's a risk of being left behind. No? So I think this is also one of the
maybe
reasons.
so. Yeah.
Or not. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the policies behind these activities and maybe address this from both perspectives. What would a private company need from a government to want to invest there, go there, like establish a base there? And then also, I know that Clara has thought a lot about these issues, which is why I had the idea of organizing this conference. Which kind of policies can also hinder the development of the space industry? Because Mexico is a really interesting case, because they used to be very active in space, and recently it has been reduced. So I think it is interesting to see why this is happening. And I think Brazil is the opposite. So maybe it would be interesting to compare both policies of the countries to see what it is that really makes the space industry want to go to one country and not another one. Clara, do you want to start?
Okay, great. Well, let me tell you that Mexico, the good thing is that we are like, let's say, a virgin territory, that we need to build a lot of things, that we can do a lot of things. There's a major need to develop more space capabilities from human resources. But on the other hand, we have a lot of specialized human resources that could be taken in advantage. Now, having said that, the satellite communications policy, or the outer space policy, it has a lot of room to improve, because if we speak just for the communication satellites, we could see that there's one thing that is established in the law, that it's called the satellite reserve. So the government imposes on satellite providers a reserve. But if it's a Mexican satellite, just to give an idea to the audience, the average capacity that a Mexican satellite has to reserve for the government for free is around 130 megahertz. But if it's a foreign constellation that has landing rights, that same contribution or satellite reserve is on average on a constellation of 28 satellites, it's around 0.28 megahertz. So then you see that there's a big difference between what's a Mexican satellite to provide services in Mexico versus the foreign satellites that can't land these rights or these signals in Mexico. I think from the research that I have performed that perhaps that's something that is hindering the development of a Mexican satellite industry. So in my opinion, that needs to be assessed and evaluated to see whether that's the reason why Brazil looks like a major satellite operator versus Mexico that simply it doesn't goes over. And just one mention regarding the port. I think launching services in Mexico would be a great idea, but launching services does not come from the day and night. It has to be developed over time. I think Mexico has to think that now we have to invest and we will see the fruits of these investments in the medium and long term. So if Mexican government just wants something to have fruits today, we're not going to invest and we're going to be left even more behind of what we are already now.
Thank you. Ian, so I understand from what Clara has said that there's a lot of foreign investment in Brazil in the sense that foreign companies use Brazilian geostationary positions, for example, and probably also filings for LEO. Do you know which policies have caused that investment, that foreign investment in Brazil?
Yes. So talking about policies, we have to talk about in Brazil, we have to talk about the National Program for Space Activities, the PNI, because it's the most critical program in Brazilian space policy and therefore must reflect the primary desires of Brazilian society. Last year in IEC in Paris, I presented my paper about the PNI. This is produced by Brazilian Space Agency, and each PNI covers 10 years period. So we had in the past, since 1996, so we had 5, and now we have the current edition, the PNI 2022 until 2031, right? Of course, this PNI tried to understand what the Brazilian society needs in the space. And that's why we discussed this in this process to bring PNI over 3 years with many actors, government, academia, private sector, companies, to try to understand what's the meaning, what's the real intention to have a strong space program, right? So as I can say, it's a new one. We have a bold ambitions here. We have tried to develop a really a big one policy program, right? So let's try to follow this PNI for until the next decade. And of course, it's not a established program. We in the process, of course, we can change or we can understand the needs can change in the period between, right? So in the years. So, but I think it's a good one because was established with this broad dialogue with many actors in the space sector in Brazil.
Yeah, it looks like it could become an example for other countries in Latin America. I don't know, Luciano, if you want to add something. If not, there are two interesting questions in the Q&A space, so I might ask them, but if you want to add something first, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Let's go to the Q&A. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, so one question is directed to you, and it is asking what services would you need from other companies to add value to Satellogic? So I think you have answered it in part, but maybe if you want to elaborate a bit more.
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Joanna, for asking that. So I would give, the main example where we collaborate a lot with other companies is when it comes to making sense out of our imagery. So we are providers of high frequency, high resolution, low cost data. That is what makes us, what we like to say makes us unique. Now, when it comes to making sense out of the imagery and applying artificial intelligence and machine learning methods and every data science application that you could use to see how a monitoring of an agricultural area is working month after month, or monitoring ports, or monitoring energy activity or governmental activity in very different places and activities. We are not really doing that ourselves. That meaning we do not have the bandwidth to serve the whole globe with making sense out of our own data. So what we do is we partner with companies. And to mention just a few, so we have a couple of projects going on in Brazil. We have a very good standing partnership with Imaging, which is Esri's local partner. We have also an agreement with DigiMap and Space Imagery Brazil. Those are other companies that we work with there. In Mexico, we have done some projects with Terradata, and we have more than 50 different associations and partners around the world that we sell through when it comes, especially selling into the private sector. We work with these companies that make sense out of the imagery and provide reports and decision-making ready analysis that serve the end clients that they serve. So, and we provide like the raw data, which are the images, and they do the work with the images before the end clients. That's, I would say, the main example of what was asked here. Then looking at how we work, I'm responsible for governments around the world. So I work a lot with space agencies directly, and they have those kinds of teams internally. So I will say this because, and I had told Clara that I would say it, because we have a standing agreement that we did some joint PR for, but we have a letter of intent that we signed with Mexico, where we agreed to work on something that we call a constellation as a service, which is serving a given country, giving them access to a certain part of our fleet of satellites and using them as if they were theirs while the satellites are orbiting above their area of interest, which is typically the country. So it's like, instead of buying a satellite, another thing that we do, and many countries engage more in those conversations because they want to own satellites, we provide this alternative where, it's a much more cost-efficient way of, instead of owning satellites of your own, using ours for a given time, and that given time being when those satellites are above the country, that we're discussing the business with. So we have signed this letter of intent with Mexico, and the whole analysis of the imagery, and we have started, delivering some sample imagery to them already, will be done by the Agencia Espacial Mexicana directly. Okay, so we don't do that kind of thing. So again, if we divide that in between, what would be the upstream process of the satellite Earth observation business, which is having the satellites and taking the images, and then the making sense out of it, which would be the downstream process, that I think is the main communion where we have, again, more than 50 different partnerships going on in different places in the world.
So just to understand, so while the satellite is orbiting, the operation control changes from one country to the next?
It's the operation, great question, the operation of the payload. So the satellites have two cameras here, okay? This is on the main telescope, it's a multispectral, very high resolution camera, okay? 70 centimeters, we're going down to 50 centimeters sometime this year, okay? That is one of the payloads that the country will operate. The other payload that they'll operate is a hyperspectral camera over here, and then there is another bay over here that carries other sensors, and they could operate that too. So we keep the operation of the bus, the orbital, functioning of the satellite, the worrying about, the thermal systems inside of it, and whatever has to do with the maintenance of the satellite in that model. But they are the ones capturing the images of their country at the time that they want and having exclusivity of the use of the assigned satellites during the time that the satellites are flying above the country of interest.
So the images can be confidential. Yes, Clara?
Correct.
I heard Ian with the Brazilian policy, but I would like to hear you also, Luciano, like you as a private company and Latin American company, what do you look for in a satellite policy, in an outer space policy of countries? That would be great if you could share it.
So, we consider ourselves a global company, even though, of course, we like to say we have a Latin American gen in ourselves. But because we are under SEC filings and we are a public company and work, according to, Wall Street regulations and NASDAQ regulations, we are sort of more aligned with what those things demand than anything else, okay? From a satellite manufacturing perspective, that the components we use were ITAR-free. So we're not regulated by any ITAR-related policy. But yeah, I think that's the main thing that we look at. Of course, we are very much aligned with the ITU, with the United Nations agency, in terms of looking at regulations that have to do with the place where we place our satellites, with the orbits they have, and so on. Because we launch many, and because there have been, there's always, our satellites are equipped with their own propulsion. So we have done a number of maneuvering activities to avoid collisions, space is getting packed. We are very private and very careful. And when we follow very strictly everything that, that the E2 demands from us in terms of positioning our satellites and orbiting around the world.
Thanks. And there's another question for the panel, which says, given that the spaceport of ESA is in South America, how do you see the collaboration between ESA and Latin American countries when it comes to the development of the space industry in the region? I don't know, even if you want to start, maybe.
Yeah, no, Brazil and Brazilian space agents, we have many agreements with many different space agencies around the world, countries, and private companies as well. But of course, when we talk about spaceport specifically, and I think that the question mentioned Kourou, of course, Kourou and Alcântara is competitive, right, sector, of course, because we are near the equator, like Kourou, and of course we try to develop a competition here to develop more launches from Brazil, of course, with many advantages, and we try to develop this advantage, right? Price, infrastructure, and many things. But of course, we had, as I can say, a long tradition with cooperation with ESA, of course. But in the space sector, in the spaceport sector, I think we try to understand and to look what ESA did in the past to develop this area and bring these ideas to develop our area as well.
Thank you. Any other
I would add something, if I may.
Yeah.
So I mentioned before that we had launched in French Guiana, which is, the Guyana Space Center is the spaceport that the question refers to. And thanks, Kathleen, for posing it. So we have had that experience from a personal standpoint and from a company standpoint. Whenever we are talking to ESA, we have more of an approach of using our European presence. So we have a firm and a big office in Barcelona and another one upcoming in the Netherlands. So we are not so much involved with ESA from a Latin America perspective. But that's, that's because we have the possibility. They are more amenable, to say it in a way, to work with European companies. So whenever we need to, to do work with ESA, it is done from, it's called Satellogic Solution SL, which is our Barcelona firm, or eventually and alternatively, we can use our Netherlands firm as well.
Thank you. I don't know, Clara, if you want to add something. If not, I think we will try to move quickly to disputes, because this is a Space Arbitration Association webinar. So I don't want to forget completely about disputes. So my question is, do you expect there to be disputes between private companies in Latin America, or between private operators and governments? And if so, do you think that the courts in your respective jurisdictions are well equipped to address those, or how do you think disputes could be resolved most efficiently in the future?
I would briefly say that definitely they're going to arise a lot of different types of disputes regarding the space industry. That's clear, it's obvious. And in the case of Mexico, at least, courts will not be prepared to address them. And also, a lot of issues in the space industry will likely have an international component. As Luciano was telling, there's a lot of things regarding the ITU, and I'm sure that the main way to resolve efficiently the disputes is arbitration. I don't see another one. The complexity of the issues that are going to be involved will not be addressed properly, I think, with the ordinary national courts.
Yes, I totally agree with Clara. I think she told everything. I totally agree. Our courts, judicial courts, are not prepared to dealing with this problem, right? And Professor Fabio Tronchetti says, as the commercialization, privatization, and internationalization of outer space grow, it's almost inevitable that disputes relating to space activities will occur. So, as I can say really quickly, Brazil is an arbitration-friendly jurisdiction. We have a law here in 996, so it's an old one. In 2001, the Brazilian Supreme Court recognized the constitutionality of arbitration in Brazil. And since then, Brazilian adopted the pro-arbitration approach, including, this is very important, public administration cases. And I really believe that the legal framework in Brazil for arbitration we have already, but of course it's needs from now to convince the space actors, the public sector, the private sector, mainly in formulation of their contracts, right? That arbitration is the safest mechanism and that it will bring better results.
Luciano, you're excused if you don't want to reply, because companies don't like to talk about disputes, but I do know that you have ICC clauses in your contracts.
Well, of course, yes, and you know, I wouldn't be shy to talk, because we wouldn't want to talk about disputes at all, but rather because, you know, I feel, you know, shadowed by my fellow colleagues here in the panel who are lawyers and know a lot more about this than I would. One thing that I would add is one organization that I think is doing a good job, and you mentioned it, Laura, in attending their latest event in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, is RELACA. RELACA is talking a lot about, you know, space policy across, you know, countries in Latin America. And I've been invited to speak at several of their events. I remember one in Paraguay where a person, I don't remember his name now, but he headed, you know, the RELACA organization at some point. He posed this scenario where, you know, a Japanese astronaut would kill an American one with a Russian gun in the International Space Station. So what law or what country applies, to arbitrate that? So of course, when going back to the question, of course, arbitration is the answer, at least, and Clara sort of gave a pessimistic but realistic scenario where these things will start happening a lot. So it's good that we are already thinking of these things and working on them before they actually start happening.
Yes, and this is why the Space Arbitration Association exists.
Indeed. I'm sorry. Yes.
No. But thank you very much all for your words and for participating today and for accepting the invitation. And I think with this, we can close the event and hand the microphone back to Torsten or to Elena